What's up, guys? This is going to be the video for puzzle number 16. As we did in the previous video for puzzle 15 in Los Angeles, we're going to be using the same technique in the Handy Manticore that it talks about, except we're doing it in reverse. So in the last puzzle, we did everything that had two pictures that were drawn. There were 12 of them total, so 2, 12. And then that's funny enough, the area code for New York. But also, we're going to be using for this New York puzzle anything that has one picture or three pictures, so ones and threes. There's going to be a total of 8 clues that we're going to be using, so we'll jump right in and get started. The first fair person clue we're going to be looking at is the Energenie, and underneath it says Conatus Conatus. For some reason, that means wood. So whether you're burning wood to start a fire, something in that regard, we're going to be looking for something that has to do with energy. And inside the clue, it's going to talk a lot about things that energy does, gas guzzlers, power mongers, short circuits. When it talks about Ethel Merman was a powerful voiced singer. But it talks about a lot of different things that you can do with energy. It also talks about General Electric and major appliances used by General Electric and privately owned resources. The only people that are really talked about in this clue, aside from Ethel Merman, are Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. Both these guys were friends. Henry Ford actually worked for one of Thomas Edison's companies before inventing the Ford automobile. And something that's interesting about Thomas Edison is that he had really no schooling. And if we took a look at Thomas Edison, you can see his education was basically self-education and some coursework at Cooper Union. So this guy educated himself. You got to give him a lot of credit. And he was one of the major inventors of his time. He invented things like the electric power generator, mass communication equipment, sound recordings that were used in motion pictures. He invented the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and an early version of the light bulb. One of the most famous quotes he ever had when somebody asked him, why did it take him 10,000 times to build a light bulb or make a working light bulb? He said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just found 9,999 ways not to make a light bulb. So tells you a little bit about the man right here. And just a little bit more about Edison. His entrepreneurship was central to the formation of some 14 companies, including General Electric. So when they talk about General Electric here, they're probably referring to Thomas Edison. And if you guys remember in one of the previous clues, it talked about Thomas Edison's laboratory or laboratory, however you want to call it. But this is basically what they're talking about. They're talking about Thomas Edison. He did build the first direct current generator, which was later topped by Nikola Tesla, who built the alternating current. And Edison did some pretty crazy things. If you want to read about it, go for it. But we're going to be looking at the Thomas Edison National Historical Park, and this is where it was the home and laboratory of Edison. This is the answer to the first clue. So we'll bookmark Thomas Edison National Historical Park, and we will move on. The next fair person clue we're going to be looking at is the geodesic gnome, also known as a geodesic dome. And a gnome is something we know from Paracelsus. We've talked about him before. The line underneath it, mustus aqueductus, means mostly water. So a few of the things they talk about in here, people-wise, they talk about a man named Van der Rohe. If you want to look up who Ludwig Mies van der Rohe was, you can see that he was a German architect and regarded as one of the pioneers of modern architecture. Some of his notable works include IBM Plaza in Chicago, the Chicago Federal Complex, and he built several buildings on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. He built the Seagram Building and the McCormick House. He also built the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, which is right across the street from Herman Park, where we were in Houston looking for the treasure. And he also built one of many Martin Luther King Jr. memorial libraries, which is in Washington, D.C. Another person that's talked about is a gentleman named Buckminster Fuller. And Buckminster Fuller was an architect and a systems theorist, a writer, inventor, philosopher, and futurist. And he came up with some very interesting designs, usually involving geodesic domes, which are what we're kind of looking for right here. The geodesic dome is a hemispherical thin shell structure based on a geodesic polyhedron. So it sounds like we're looking for something like that. And if you guys remember in Montreal, they had the Expo of 67. Buckminster Fuller actually built a geodesic dome in for the Expo of 67. And if you want to check it out, it's still intact on the island. So two references to two different people where two of the casks were buried, the exact places very close to where they were buried. If you want, you could take a look at the pictures. There are three pictures here for the geodesic gnome, and it seems like what we're going to be looking for is something that has to do with a geodesic dome. Just before I move on, they also talk about something about the Teutonic Old World. This is the second time we've seen the term Teutonic. And then he also talks about the Rainbow Bridge to Asgard. And we've talked about Asgard or something about Asgard in the San Antonio puzzle, which was the tribute puzzle, talking about Valkyries and Odin. So kind of interesting how they all kind of are intertwined. But the clue that we're going to be using here that will help us is in the spotter's tips. It says the paving over of a forest field and stream for a throughway to the Nature World theme park. Now, it took a little bit of time to find out where this exact geodesic dome was, but after some research, we came across a place that was actually built for the 1964 New York World's Fair, which was in Flushing Meadows in Queens. And if you were to zoom in where the current Queens Zoo is, if we were to zoom in on the aviary, this would be an example of a geodesic dome right here, which is what Buckminster Fuller created. So the aviary in the park for Flushing Meadows. A couple of other interesting things of note. The street is called the United Nations Avenue. We've talked about the United Nations before. They have a unisphere. And if you were to look at this general shape right here, you could see something that looks like something we've seen before in Houston. Also, there is a statue of George Washington in this park. George Washington, kind of interesting. But from there, we're going to mark the aviary in this area, and this is going to be the answer for the geodesic dome. It's going to be where the 1964 New York World's Fair was held in Flushing Meadows, Queens. And we're going to mark it and move on. The next fair person clue we're going to be talking about is the Spirit of St. Louis, and underneath it says Babbitt Redux. What does that mean? Well, it means he babbled back. So, kind of interesting. This clue only has one picture. It's not that interesting of a picture. It's just a foot stepping on a cracked piece of pavement that is kind of a right-angled triangle. The people that are mentioned in here are basically Charles Lindbergh, who actually built a plane called the Spirit of St. Louis. And if we take a little look at who Charles Lindbergh was, we could see that he was the first person to make a nonstop flight from New York to Paris, which was a distance of 3,600 miles. And he actually had an aircraft built in San Diego, and he named it the Spirit of St. Louis. This wasn't the first transatlantic flight, but it was the longest at the time by nearly 2,000 miles, and he made it all the way there. If you guys want to watch a movie about the Spirit of St. Louis, Jimmy Stewart actually made a film about it in 1957, and it's just called The Spirit of St. Louis as well, but it kind of tells the story about what he did to get ready, and it shows some of the things that he went through. So kind of interesting. If you want to watch it, go for it. But like I said, the Spirit was built by Ryan Airlines in San Diego, California, and then it was flown to St. Louis, and he stopped off there. Then he flew to another location before flying off to Paris, and that location was from Roosevelt Field in New York. So, unfortunately, Roosevelt Field is no longer there. If you were to type in Roosevelt Field on your Google Maps, it'll take you to what is now a mall. And this is over in Garden City near Hempstead. But this is where the airfield used to be, and this is where Charles Lindbergh took off and he flew all the way to Paris for the first time. So we're going to bookmark this spot right here, Roosevelt Field, and we're going to move on. The next fair person clue that we're going to be taking a look at is Union Jack. And the saying underneath it, Britannicus basically means British from ... So a lot of this clue right here has to deal with things of British origins, like British Columbia or the royal family, or other things that have to do with more of a British feel. They talk about having tea, which is something very British. They talk about Shakespeare festivals. Funny, we've talked about Shakespeare Gardens, so another Shakespeare reference there. And it talks about cities like Kew and the Queen's husband's birthdays. So this Jack, if you want to think of, is a knave. And what we're looking for, this is kind of like in the last puzzle where Tupper Werewolf was for Beverly Hills. If you're thinking for something really British, I think the only thing that really comes to mind is the city of Queens. But if we were looking at a map, we could see that the city of Queens engulfs a big part. And we were talking about Flushing Meadows, Corona Park. That's inside of Queens. We were talking about Roosevelt Field, and that's very close to where Queens is. When it talks about Kew or Kew, Kew Gardens, that's also in the city of Queens. So it sounds like we're looking for something British, and obviously for the longest time, Queen Elizabeth was the Queen of England. God save the Queen, but unfortunately she passed away not too long ago. But the city of Queens is what we're going to be looking for, so we're going to bookmark this on our map, and we're going to move to the next. So the next fair person we're going to take a look at is Werner von Brownie, and underneath the line says Incendiary el diffugere, basically means burn and flee. Very interesting. They would say burn and flee. It sounds like you're burning the house down, which we've talked about previously. But the main headline of Werner von Brownie, if you guys know anything about history, you would know that is a reference to a gentleman named Werner von Braun. And if you want to do some research on him, you'll find that he was part of the Nazi Party. He developed the V-2 rockets for Hitler, which Hitler used during the war. The V-2 became the first artificial object to travel into space on the 20th of June, 1944. And after World War II, Werner von Braun immigrated to the United States, where he later started to work with NASA, what we know as NASA today. He's the guy that actually built up the American space program. Also, interestingly enough, he worked with Walt Disney on a series of films which popularized the idea of humans traveling into space in the US and beyond from 1955 to 1957. So kind of interesting. He went from being a Nazi to working with Walt Disney and heading the NASA space program. Now, when you're reading this clue, you're going to get a feel for things that tend to blow up or have very bad consequences, things that just kind of go awry. He talks about 3 Mile Island and the Geiger counters. Certain things happen there if you want to look it up. And it sounds like this person is in constant experimentation mode. Like, what would happen if only one injured fired? What happens if this hose gets connected where that hose is supposed to go? So basically, he's just messing with things just to see what would happen. Um, there's a interesting thing where he talks about a Chinese kid force-fed the first firecracker to a Mongolian frog. Not too sure what that has to do, but that sounds kind of bad. And then he also talks about certain things that have to do with rockets, combustible engines. But one line that's going to help us is he talks about um, brownies are not above taking an evening off to meddle with the fuel propellant and skyrockets at a local 4th of July fireworks display. So it seems like we're looking for something that has to do with possibly fireworks, and we're looking for something that has to do with kind of messing with the status quo and burning things down in order to build them up. Now, knowing that we're going to be in New York City, if you do some research, it says that the best places to see the fireworks show are either going to be along the East River or along the Hudson River, depending on where the fireworks are. And that's kind of a vague concept right here. I mean, the East River is pretty expansive. It goes all the way up, all the way down, and that's not going to help us. But it took a little bit of time to find the answer to this clue. This clue is very similar to the Kindergartenians that we did in the last puzzle 15, where you have to know what you're trying to accomplish in order to find the clue or the answer to the clue. And eventually, I was able to find one place in particular along the East River that made the most sense, and that was the Robert Moses Playground. Now, first of all, who was Robert Moses? And you're going to see on his Wikipedia page that he was an American urban planner and public official who worked in the New York metropolitan area. And he's regarded as one of the most powerful and influential people in the history of New York City and the state. The grand scale of his infrastructure projects and his philosophy of urban development influenced generations of engineers and architects to come. Some of the things he accomplished were the construction of Jones Beach State Park. He was the primary architect of the New York State Parkway system. He was the head of the Triborough Bridge Authority, and he also built the Triborough Bridge, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which we've talked about near Battery Island, and he did a lot for public housing projects. He destroyed huge swaths of tenement housing, and he put large public housing projects there. So this guy would tear things down and build them up, and then he would build things to help the city for transportational efforts. There was also a book that was published on him in 1974 by Robert Caro, which was a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography called The Power Broker. So if you ever want to read about it, you can learn more about what Robert Moses really did. Also, I want to mention that we keep talking about the baseball teams like the Dodgers and the Giants. Well, Robert Moses was the guy that actually got the Giants and the Dodgers to leave New York. The owner of Brooklyn Dodgers wanted to build a new field because Ebbets Field was starting to fall apart, and basically Robert Moses wouldn't let him. Robert Moses wanted to build a new area for the New York World's Fair in 1964 in Flushing Meadows, Queens, and that was where they wanted to build the baseball stadium. Unfortunately, they couldn't agree to anything, and at that time, the owner, who was Walter O'Malley, said, forget it. We want to stay in Brooklyn. You're not going to let us build here. You want to build it in Queens. We're not going to do it. So basically, they left. Eventually, Robert Moses built Shea Stadium, and that's where the New York Mets currently play. But the reason both the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers left was because of Robert Moses. So credit to him for giving California two of its most storied baseball teams. Anyway, the answer for this clue is going to be Robert Moses, so we're going to bookmark it and we're going to move on. The next fair person clue we're going to be taking a look at is the Hounds of the News. And underneath it says Canis inebriosus. That means drunken dogs. So that's kind of funny. This basically, the title says it all. We're looking for news. They talk about newspapers and people who have reported things in the news. You have guys like Halliburton, who went to Cuba, Lowell Thomas, who worked with Lawrence of Arabia, did a story on him. You have guys like Breslin, Royko, and Hamill, who were newspapermen. They also won the Damon Runyon Award from the newspaper in Colorado, so a little bit of a connection there. And they talk about Ernest Hemingway and a guy named de Tocqueville. You can look them up if you'd like. Izzy Stone. Hemingway was a good friend of F. Scott Fitzgerald, which we talked about previously, but you can see that in this picture there are going to be 3 pictures here, and then you have some news dogs over at a bar is what it looks like, and then you have a bartender right here. So we're looking for a place that has to do with the news. That's basically it. And there was one building in particular that stood out, obviously, because it's called the News Building. And you can see inside that they have this really beautiful world globe right in the center of one of their floors. Never been here, but definitely looks like a cool building. The News Building right here. So we're not going to do too much more. We're just going to bookmark this spot, the News Building, and we're going to move on to the next. Next fair person clue we're going to be talking about is the calculus. And underneath it says Principia Mathematica. That basically means mathematical principles. And if any of you guys have taken calculus, definitely tough. But if you do your studying, you'll figure it out, right? This has to do a lot with math. You know, he talks about algebra, long division, and all that fun stuff. And he talks about 2 people in specific. He talks about Pythagoras, who we all know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And also he talks a little bit about Euclid, whose name we've seen on streets before. But these are 2 Greek mathematicians. And one of the clues that we're going to be using is when he talks about he set the nasty thing down in the middle of a bridge, his 5th proposition. And they also mention a school right above, MIT graduate. So we could see that they're talking about something that has to do with schools. And that's where we're going to be looking. If it says MIT twice, if you want to think of something similar in New York, what's a school that has 3 letters that describe it, or that it's short for, you could think of NYU, New York University. And if we zoomed in on New York University, we could see that the main streets around it are 5th, here's 4th, and up above is 8th. Right in the middle would be 5th, but that's actually Washington. And over here we have 5th Avenue that runs straight into Washington Square Park. So this is the area of New York University, the 5th. Kind of tells us where we are. Also, there's a street nearby that probably you've recognized before, Lafayette Street, Lafayette, Washington, New York. So I'm not going to get too much more into it, but the answer to this one is New York University. So what we'll do is we'll bookmark it and we'll move on. Now, the final clue for the Puzzle 16 New York puzzle is going to be small businessmen. And the line underneath it, Ein klein Knockmuckenstich, that's German for small mosquito bite. So if you're talking about small businesses and small mosquito bites, they're talking about how little people are able to make a little bit of money here. It talks about selling short. Kind of interesting that they would say sell short, short sell. If you guys know what that is, you guys probably know what I'm going to be talking about next. In the spotters tips, they talk about little profits, small talk, small print, bit slow paying bills, low overhead, dwarfs that of a large corporation. So also they talk a little further up about Dragon's Gold Hoard. We've heard that before. And a Dragon's Lair. Kind of interesting. But if you guys understand short selling and ways to kind of manipulate your cash and paying your bills and stuff like that, and small businesses, well, where do these businesses put themselves up in order to try and gain more money? And everybody who knows New York it knows what it's most famous for. And that's going to be on the southern part of Manhattan. We're talking about the New York Stock Exchange. A lot of companies want to list themselves on the New York Stock Exchange or maybe the NASDAQ or something of the sort because they need to try and get investors to build capital. They want to become a larger company while these small companies need to get some kind of financing to do that. So they'll sell stocks, and hopefully if they're profitable, they'll make money. And if they make money, you, the investors, will make money as well. So not going to get too much more into it, but the answer for small businessmen is going to be the New York Stock Exchange. So we're going to bookmark this point, and that concludes puzzle 16. Next, we'll connect the dots and see what we can find. So now we have our 8 points plotted on the map. And what we're going to do now is we're going to connect the dots to see what we can find. One thing I'm going to mention here is that we're going to be using 1 point just a little differently than we normally do, and that's going to be Queens. You can see Queens is an area, and what we want to do is we want to stick with the area here. And I'll show you what I mean when I connect the dots, but just keep that in mind. We're connecting it around the area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up our paint. Here we are in paint, and let's connect the dots and see what we can find. So for this one, I'm just going to show you how it would look going from Thomas Edison to Wall Street. This is our second point, and what we'll be doing is we'll be going around the island or the city of Queens up to Roosevelt Park, going around the center of Queens, coming down through Flushing Meadows, where the World's Fair was held, up through Robert Moses, the Hounds of the News, and then back over. We would consider this a circle in the middle where Queens is, and this would be our 16 right here. So you can see a 6, what's supposed to be a 6, and a 1 and a 6. And something that looks very similar would be from San Francisco. And here we have the San Francisco map, and you can see that it's a 6 right here, and it goes around the Strawberry Hill Island right here. So very similar. We have something in the middle to create the illusion of a 6, and then it goes out and around. And this is kind of an open area talking about education and justice on both sides. So here we have our 16, and here is another version of the 6. We have found 16 and we found 15, and we are done with this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll be moving on to some bigger and better things next. I'll explain in the next video. Thanks, and talk to you later.